Can you repair a cell? No. Except I kinda did.
Excuse me, Mr. President. That's not entirely accurate.
What? Which part?
Hey, I'm Brian, and welcome to Vinyl Paints. And in this episode, I'm gonna try to repair some animation cells. Before we go any further, don't try this at home. So, in my opinion, there are 4 horsemen of the cell collecting apocalypse. The first one is line art damage. The second one is actual damage to the actual painting itself. Also, overall dirt and grime. The third one, which I think is probably the most common, or at least the one that I hear people wish they could correct the most, and that's when the actual line art or douga is stuck to the cell. The final horseman of cell collecting is probably vinegar syndrome. I'm not going to talk about it too much in this video. It deserves its own video, and I've been incredibly lucky as a collector. I didn't really experience vinegar syndrome till quite recently. However, I will acknowledge that I had a little bit of a Chicken Little thing where quite a few times I thought I had vinegar syndrome. So anytime anything happened with my cell that I couldn't explain, I always kind of chalked it up to vinegar syndrome. I'll go into that on a future video. So I'm kind of feeling like a bit like Dr. Frankenstein here, being a little bit of a mad scientist trying to fix these cells. But I feel like the situation was right for me to try and do this. If anyone's been following this channel for a while, you know that last year I responded to an ad where someone had rescued some cells from a dumpster, that these babar cells were being thrown out, and there was rain, they were in terrible condition, and they offered them to me. They still made me pay, but I kind of feel that if I wasn't going to get them, they probably would have ended up back in a dumpster. So because of that, I always kind of wanted to go back and eventually try my hand at repairing a cell. And I didn't really have the confidence to do that on a cell until recently. A couple of videos ago, I did a video on Cuphead where I made a failed experiment. So in this video, we're gonna attempt to do 4 repairs. We're gonna try to repair that Cuphead cell that I made a mistake on and see how far I can take that repair to make it look better. For Christmas, I got this Ken cell that is a beautiful cell from the Street Fighter Victory series, but unfortunately the line art has almost been completely erased. So I'm gonna try to restore the line art so that I can frame it and hang it up. Then we're gonna try to do some paint repair on some babar cells. These cells were recovered from the garbage bin. Even though I still am attached to them and I want to do my part to preserve history, I still feel comfortable knowing that they were kind of garbage anyways. So if I can restore them, great. If I can't, I'll be sad, but I don't think I will really have hurt the cell community. And then once again, we're going to revisit the babar cells because I have some that are where the cells are stuck to the line art, and I'm going to try to attempt to remove the line art from the cell while trying to preserve both the line art and the cell. So let's start this madness on the one that kind of inspired this video. In an earlier video, I painted Cuphead. I did 2 of them, and the reason why I did 2 of them is because I wanted to kind of experiment to see whether it looks better with white on the back of the yellow or black on the back of the yellow. In case you don't know, yellow's been a problem. I've been trying to figure it out. And as you can see here, the white looks significantly better. The black almost looks patchy and muddy. It just looks like a very poor product. So because I go to conventions with these paintings, I don't want anyone to end up with something that looks muddy or not very nice. So I decided to see if I could try to repair it. And at first, I just started with some water and chiseling away with it, hoping to get an edge so that I could peel it off. But I think because I'd used 2 different types of cells, for whatever reason, they were adhering relatively well, at least the Toon Tones Black was. So eventually I switched over to alcohol. I put a paper towel underneath it, thinking that that would absorb and stop any of the alcohol from getting all over the place. Unfortunately, I would later find out that that was probably a mistake. If you notice on the left-hand side, you're gonna see a faded line, and that line is the line art from the front of the cell. Somehow the alcohol was absorbing through the paper towel, and it was actually affecting the line art on the other side. Of course, at this point here, I didn't really notice it, but when I flipped it over, I would begin to see the effects of some of the damage that had been done. I thought the hardest part of this would be the removal of the paint, and even though this would require some finesse, it wasn't so much difficult as time consuming. Before I started with anything else, I decided I was going to just clean up the front of the cell as well as pick away any loose parts here. And even though I thought I washed the front of the cell and the back of the cell with water, I was finding that it didn't seem to rub off the effects of the alcohol. In fact, the more and more I looked at it, the more and more I noticed that the line art was coming off. I'd done the line art with Posca, so I thought I could just go over it in the end with Posca after I repainted the back. The yellow always has this transparency thing. It's not as good as whatever they use for The Simpsons. So I finished the yellow and then quickly redo a coat of white. And as you can see, the paint's fixed, but all the line art had flaked off just in the parts where I feel that the alcohol had gotten in. So I redid it with the Posca paint marker, hoping for the best. After a day of it drying, I decided to come down, sign my name, and I thought I would be able to ready to frame it. But as I was putting it in, I noticed that it was actually still quite bad. And this was the second attempt with the Posca paint marker. So at this point here, I decided to try a different ink. My technical pens use a different type of ink and just kind of like refill in everything. I wasn't thrilled about using the technical pens. They don't have the same thickness as the Posca paint marker. So I don't think the lines are quite as sharp as they were with the Posca paint marker. But it was the only way that I could figure to kind of get things to work. The repair wasn't 100% seamless. There were some micro abrasions and some little bit of rough stuff, I would say. Some of the line art is a little bit chunkier and not as smooth as it was before the repair. However, I will say it does look better than it did before. Replacing the yellow with a white backing definitely made the piece look better. And so I still consider this a success. However, this did embolden me. And after doing this, I wondered, what else could I repair? So for my birthday, I got this amazing cell of Chen from Street Fighter 2, the animated series, the anime from Japan, not the North American one. And I really love that series. And obviously, I think that person had seen me doing all these Street Fighter paintings, so they decided to get this one, which had been definitely on my list of ones I really wanted to get. Unfortunately, as you can see here, a lot of the cell had been faded away, not so much the cell, but the line art. So I decided to open it up and see what I can do. Because I actually care about this cell, like this was something I was really such a nice gift. I wanted to do my due diligence as I progressed. I wanted to take as little chance as possible with this. So I took out the microscope or the magnifying glass to see if I could find anything wrong with it, and I kind of double checked everything before I began. The background had been taped to the mat, and rather than try to peel it off, even though this isn't a matching background, I decided I would just use a knife and kind of cut it off. The next thing I noticed is that there was some surviving ink below that kind of gave me an indication of what ink I should use to kind of best get it to match. And then I began to work on the staples. Yes, this breaks my heart, but someone decided to staple this to the background and then frame it. I kind of moved around. At first, the staples were very thin, so I thought I could do it with a knife. And eventually I moved to a tweezer. Had it not worked, I probably would have gone up and used a pair of pliers. After removing the staples, the next step was to re-inspect the cell. And I noticed there was a bit of damage on his chest here. But as I said, this cell is actually kind of quite precious to me, and the damage wasn't piercing through to the other side. It just seemed to be damage on the back. So because it wasn't peeking through the other side and the damage only seemed to be on the back, it made no sense for me to try to fix it. Because this cell is different than the Babar cells, where this one is relatively complete and in good shape, I didn't actually want to work on the cell itself. The only repair I'm going to try to do on this one is, as I said, number 2, which is line art repair. I don't have access to the actual douga or the actual line art, so I'm going to have to kind of do it on top of it. And so my first set was to try and find the right cell to put on top of it. This is using a Japanese style of cell, so none of the American sizes I had seemed to really fit, and the one Japanese size of cell I have also just didn't really seem to fit. It just seemed a little bit too big. Ultimately, I decided to go with a 10F cell. It's a little bit smaller than the cell I'm actually working on here, but it did have one great advantage over the other cells, and that is that the thickness is a little bit thicker than the other ones. Because I would be tracing on top of the cell, having a little bit of extra thickness would mean that it would probably do a better job of protecting the cell from any damage that the nib would have when I go over the line art later on. And as you can see here, I just started using a nib and some ink to kind of go over the lines to kind of bring back the vibrance of this piece so that I could hang it up. It was slow going and some of the lines had almost faded to nothing. The foot was very pronounced, but some of the line art on the actual cell, on the pants and on the hair, I needed to bring out the magnifying glass for. One of the things I noticed when I was redoing the line art on this was they actually had done the hair quite sloppy and it was well outside of the lines, but I still decided to try to keep the original line work intact, kind of just make it fit like it should. So there's probably a couple of ways I could have approached doing this repair. The first one would be doing it on the actual cell. I'll show a little video up here of me doing it on the Babar cell. However, the Babar cell is simple and honestly I didn't care whether it worked or not. As where this one, like I said, I like this piece, I want this piece. I decided it was a lot safer to do it on a separate layer. I don't think it will affect the cell in any way, and I'm not risking making a mistake. The other way this could be done, if you had the actual line art, is you could just do the line art on a clear cell and then just put it on top, and it should theoretically line up perfectly. Unfortunately, this piece did not come with the line art, so I decided to use that thicker cell as I mentioned, put it on top, and then just redo the line art on top. It took some time, especially because a lot of the lines I wasn't able to see and I had to kind of work in pieces to let it dry properly, but I'm pretty happy with the results. And I think because I had the right materials, this was a relatively safe repair to do. Now I can frame it and it really pops and looks nice. So this is the third repair. So for this one, this had a lot wrong with it. Obviously here you can see some cracks from this Babar cell, as well as some missing paint in the lower, I guess we'll call them socks or pants and shoes, as well as his head is actually missing some. And as you can see here, I'm also pointing out that there are some missing ink pieces as well. But before I start anything, because this was a Babar cell and it was quite dirty from just being in the garbage and being exposed to rain and other elements, I decided I'd start with a light cleaning before I went and tried to actually repair the ink. And unlike this Chen one, I'm actually repairing the ink on the cell just to see how it looks and to see whether it works. And so far, it's looking pretty good. I knew the one thing that I would always be struggling with whenever I do any kind of repair is matching paint. Matching paint is an art in itself, and I wanted to see if I had any base colors that were truly close before I would start. And luckily the flesh tone actually matched the color of his suit very well, and so I decided to do that repair. And this one here is just a little chunk that's missing, as well as some cracks that look like scratches inside the cell. I wasn't overly worried about trying to keep a nice smooth thing here. I'm actually doing more of a blob approach, and that's because the chroma colors that I have seem to be a little bit more transparent than the actual paint that was used originally. So I wanted to keep it a little bit thicker just so that it would actually look better and have the same transparency all the way through. I probably, on hindsight, could have repainted the entire section. I don't think it would have pierced through the other stuff, and it would have made it look a little bit more polished and nice. But like I said, this is an experiment and I'm just trying to learn here. One of the other reasons why I decided to keep the paint a little bit thicker, and you can see that here with that there's a little bit of texture in the white, is because I didn't want to risk it running anywhere where I didn't want it to. And I noticed this white crack in the white, so I decided to fill it in. And at this point here, I was feeling pretty confident because so far the two repairs I had done had looked flawless, and unfortunately that may have been my downfall. So here I'm doing some additional cleaning, and now I'm getting into the cracks on the actual skin tone here. This is the closest gray I had, and it didn't really come close. It was a little bit too dark, And the gray that was the actual elephants used in Babar seemed to have a little bit of tone of red. So what you're seeing here is I'm actually just dabbing it a little bit just to see how it will dry after I've mixed the paint. So at this point here, I'm only thinking that this is a minor repair. I think it's going to be very similar to the trench coat, where it's just cracks inside the gray of the ear and the trunk. Unfortunately, little did I know that that was not the main problem. So after spending some time mixing and trying to get the right gray, I wasn't 100% confident with it, but here I thought I could get away with just maybe even having a little bit darker, because all I was trying to do was fill in the scratches. Little did I know that it wasn't the scratch. And when I flipped it over here, I had missed this before. Maybe I had seen it and thought it was something else, but that's actually an air pocket. And that would come into play very shortly. I decided to put this part in real time because, as you can see here, I am not moving. This is the moment of sheer panic. I have no idea what exactly I'm doing here. I'm kind of just like, do I keep going? Do I stop? I start with the trunk again, but clearly here I'm a little bit in disbelief. I keep fiddling around with it, trying to think, and at this point here I realize I have to make a decision because this is just not going to end well if this dries the way it does. So I decided to try to lift the paint up to see how extensive the damage is. And as you can see here, it's extensive.
This is fine. I'm okay with the events that are unfolding currently. That's okay. Things are gonna be okay.
So my next course of action is to swallow my pride and just try and take out what I've done. Unfortunately, that meant taking paint away from other sections that were fine. At this point, I tried to fill in the gray and restart the process. Unfortunately, now I'm realizing that my slightly off gray is nowhere near close to the actual gray that the actual elephant was. And even though I thought it had dried relatively well, it wasn't. So I have mixed feelings on this whole Babar cell. Obviously, it turned out kind of messy here, but it started so good. And in fact, I might even say until it didn't, it was actually going really well. The white of the socks came out well, the fixing of the suit turned out well, the boots as well, and the hair, doing the line art on top, all of these things were coming out well. And it wasn't until maybe I got overconfident and did the gray without doing enough tests that things really went wrong. Mind you, I didn't know I was going to hit an air pocket, but I guess that's the thing about repairing things. You never really know what's going to happen. Now, I do want to say that I've actually been able to repair this cell to a point where it's actually, I feel comfortable and it feels pretty good. It's not seamless, but it feels good. I'm going to save that for another video. I think it's important to show that I can fail because I show it quite often, but also the dangers that come when you do these kind of things. Like, it's not always going to work out, and there are things that you might not expect that can happen while painting these cells. And yeah, and that's why I put that warning at the beginning of this video, because things can go wrong real quick. Now, you would think after that failure I'd probably stop trying to repair cells, but I didn't. And so now I'm going to try to unstick a cell from the line art. This Babar cell, as you can see here, the page is yellow. It has water damage. It must have gone hit in the rain, so it's really stuck on there. In fact, I probably should have started with a different cell that wasn't as stuck, because this one is almost fully stuck on every part of the paint. As you can see here, there's a lot of paper damage, so I don't actually know the stability or integrity of the paper as well. And there's a couple of reasons why I decided to attempt to unstick this on the Babar cells, and that's mainly because I've had to deal with this before on my own paintings. And while I was dealing with the chaos that was the last painting, I realized that the consistency of it and the texture of it felt very similar to chroma color. And I know that in the past I've been able to reactivate chroma color using certain techniques. So I figured I would try to put those on here and see if I could actually remove the page from the cell. The first thing I started with was the hairdryer, and in fact, I think that was a terrible idea. In fact, I think it was actually making it worse by actually warping the cell some more. And it made me realize that probably the moisture is gone from it. And that's why when I was on the other one that ended up in a catastrophe, the last Babar cell, it was when it had water that I was actually beginning able to work with it. So I moved over to the steamer to see if I could try to get it to loosen up a little bit. It takes a lot of patience to do this. And for me, the goal was to steam it to the point where it was moist, but still very durable. Because my goal is not only to separate it, but to try to preserve both the painting and the cell. And at this point here, I'm not 100% it's gonna work. I tried doing it in between the cell and the paper to see if that would kind of give it a little bit more go. And at this point, I could feel it slowly starting to release. And I'm feeling confident now, so I give the thumbs up and I begin to go to work. It was very slow moving at first. In fact, there was times where I thought I should probably stop and go at it from the other side. And eventually I do decide to do that. And I think that was a mistake because I think the grain of the paper is going one way and you should probably keep it consistent. See, the second I switch it over to this side, you'll notice that it's starting to peel a little bit, and that probably could have been avoided had I just continued from the other side. But at the time, I didn't really notice that. And well, I did notice it because I stopped and went to the other side, but I'd already done some damage. Hindsight. But these are the things you learn, and this is why I did this, is because now I know a little bit better. And as you can see here, it took a long time and a lot of work, but I was eventually able to peel it off. And I think it was actually relatively a good peel. Like most of the cell the cell is intact. There's some minor warping from when I used it with the hairdryer. So now I'm gonna try to steam it back into place and try to see if I can warp the cell back into place. This part here, it felt like it was working, but I'm not 100% sure. Maybe it was just my own imagination that I felt it was actually making it a little bit flatter. But as it seemed to settle down and become flatter, I decided not to risk it and actually put some tape to hold it down so that it would reform in a nice flat manner. I also filled up my memory card at this point, so it probably will cut till when it's done. But this process, as well as just pushing it all out to make it nice and flat on the animation disc, did take some time. At this point here, I decided to just try to do a little bit of work on the actual line art. I didn't want to do too much. This paper is already in a rough shape. You can see here that it's got a bunch of stains and dirt and folds that were already there prior to me working on it. And I didn't want to risk ruining it any more than it has. I debated between taking it down to get it flatter, but I decided that because it had already been exposed to water, maybe I should leave it. Now the real question is, was that a fluke or was it repeatable? I started with this very hard one to peel, and then when I went back in my collection, I immediately found this cell here to see if I could repeat it. And it's like a super simple one, like there's only a little bit of paint, the page is already ripped. And I kind of am like, why didn't I start with this one? But I didn't. So I guess right now we'll have to answer the question, is it repeatable? And the answer is yes. And in fact, even though it wasn't as bad, I actually think I did a better job of preserving the line art. So, can you repair a cell? I guess the short answer is yeah. But I guess the question as a collector we should be asking ourselves is, should we?
I think you're giving us our due credit. Our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they didn't stop to think if they should.
As someone who wants to keep cell painting alive and also maintain its history, being able to revitalize these cells does have a certain appeal, but there's also great risk involved. And just because I'm relatively happy with how these ones turned out, obviously the Babar one not included.
She'll be fine. Everything's fine.
But the monsters!
It's fine. It's fine.
Are you sure? Because she has 0 adventurer training.
Yeah. Well, it's fine. She'll be fine. It's fine.
Maybe it is fine.
There was a lot of risk involved. And just because something worked on these ones doesn't mean that that's repeatable on a different cell in the future. As I may or may not have mentioned already, the early Disney cells were done with gouache, not cell vinyl. The only reason why I felt comfortable doing this with the Babar ones is because it felt and kind of performed and acted like the cell vinyl paints I'd used. so I kind of knew where I could kind of push it. Now obviously there's different risk levels to each one of these repairs, so I'll probably revisit this in the future and see what other cells I can repair. But till then, thanks for watching. I'm Brian, and this was Vinyl Paints.